All right. Well, ALV grid is the topic for today, and I don't really have a lot of slides related to this. There is a chapter in your textbook on ALV grids that can be a good reference for you should you desire to look back at that at any point. Certainly in the future, I don't know if I've mentioned this, you should have read your whole textbook by this point. I think you'll find that if you look back at the different chapters and compare it with what we have covered, probably around 60% or more of the topics in your textbook we've talked about in one way or the other. If you are interested in a career in ABAP development in the future, and that can be a very, very good, uh, fairly high-paying career path for you to potentially pursue. That book is the current book on ABAP development, so I would encourage you to hang on to it. And certainly, over the summer, you'll want to write lots of ABAP programs, I'm sure. So, I will mention as an aside, one of the things that's a little bit different about ABAP versus, say, Java is you have to have a SAP ERP system to write ABAP in, whereas Java you can just write on your laptop standalone. If any of you in the future want to continue building or refreshing your ABAP skills and want an account, just send me an email. Your account that you have now will expire probably by the end of May or so when the server gets rebuilt for the next academic year. But I am happy to set you up with a new account thereafter if you are interested. And that offer extends until you finish your time here at ETSU, and even in a couple instances, I've given some alumni accounts for some purposes. So if you have interest in that, certainly let me know. But our output so far this semester has been using what is commonly called just a traditional list output. And although we don't use the keyword list output is what we create when we use the keyword write. And particularly when we organize things into columns and we align it in tabular fashion, that's just called list output. And we've done a whole lot of that this semester. But there are other ways that we can structure output, including what we are going to talk about today, which is an ALV grid. And I've forgotten what ALV stands for. I know the LV part of it stands for list view, but I don't recall what the A actually stands for. For all I know, it could stand for attractive, but I don't think that that's actually what it is. But this is going to give us a way of outputting data in tabular format that's going to make it look more like what you would see from an Excel workbook, let's just say. Now, the ALV grid is one of these things that can be incredibly complicated, as you will see. But the focus of our discussion is to be on the basics of it, how you use it, and with that as a foundation, then you can go on and you can learn more advanced features on your own as time goes by. This is definitely an area where Google would be your friend, where you could do a Google search for ALV grid view or some of the other things we're going to do, and then a question like how do I put borders or how do I make the cells editable, and you can find web pages that walk you through this in more detail. What we are going to talk about is two common methods of outputting, which is either the ALV list display or the ALV grid display. And both of these methods of output will take data from an internal table and output it to the screen. And so that is what we will talk about. But the formation and population of an internal table is something we have done extensively this semester, so you should be familiar with that. The actual way, there's several different ways that you can deploy ALV grids in your program. There's at least 5 different methods. We're going to focus on really just 2 of those in our discussion, and that is the use of an ALV grid from what's called the ABAP reuse library. The ABAP reuse library is a set of functions that were written partly to develop the system by SAP, and then some that have been built up in addition to that over time that just represent functions that are a part of the system that are available for us to call. And so there are just a huge set of different kinds of functions in the ABAP reuse library. That's something that you could explore on your own at some point should you be interested in that. But what we are going to focus on is the reuse ALV list display and the reuse ALV grid display, which give us two different ways of writing these to the screen. Now, where this gets complicated is, it would be great if we could make a very, very simple function call and pass a couple parameters and this would be done. And on some level, we can do that, but as you're going to see here in a moment, these are library functions which have a huge set of parameters that we could pass to it. And so with that being the case, we really have to start very, very simple and then build up our use after that. So the idea here is that there are only two required parameters. There are a lot of recommended parameters, and there are a huge array of optional parameters. But the only two required parameters are the internal table that the display will use as the, if you will, the guts of the table that are being displayed, and then something called a field catalog. Now, a field catalog is simply the set of things that are displayed at the top of each column as the titles, if you will. So you're used to that concept. We have done a lot this semester where you've written output where there's been a header and then there's been things output underneath the header. Well, same concept here, except the titles of each of the columns are in what's called a field catalog, and then we have the internal table that specifies the guts. The name of the internal table is called T_OutTab. And I'll show you what I mean when I say the name is. Basically what I'm saying is that's the name of the parameter that you will set with the name of your internal table. And then I_structure name is the parameter that you will set that is the field catalog or the fields in the table. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can set I_structure name. One thing is if we, for example, have an internal table based on a database table, and we are displaying that table in its entirety, then we have a very nice little shortcut in that we can just pass it the name of the database table, and it will use that as the field catalog. So kind of the easiest thing here is when you have a display that is based on a database table that already exists. If you are displaying a subset of a table, which obviously is a pretty common thing for us to do, or an internal table that you have built up in your program that is not directly related to a dictionary object, then what you're going to have to do is build your own field catalog manually, which requires a fair amount of number of lines of code, but is not really that complicated. It's just a more manual process because you're going to have to go column by column and specify what every one of those columns actually are. If you want the documentation for these functions, we're going to go into a part of the system we have never gone into before, which is the function builder. And so let's look at that for a second. If I go to transaction code SE37, So I will pop up a new window here and do this. SE37 brings us to the function builder, which is a lot like the class builder, only here we're not building objects and classes. We are accessing functions that have been created already in the system. And so I can put in the very first one we talked about, which is the reuse underscore ALV underscore list underscore display, and then I can hit display, and at first it will bring up, this is the actual code of the ALV or the reuse ALV list display, which you would be free to scroll through this if you were so inclined, but I don't know that you'd get a lot out of it. But you can see there's a lot here at the front that has been commented out, and there's a pretty good block of code here associated with this. But what we're more interested in is the documentation. And so the documentation here tells us a little bit about what this is. Allows us to output a simple list, and we get some documentation. But what is perhaps of more importance to us is this list down here at the bottom of parameters. And if you're ever working with this particular function, or really any other function in the system, you can look it up in the function builder, find the documentation, and then use that to drill down into specifics. But I'll be real honest with you. Some of this documentation, even the documentation, is really cryptic and kind of unclear. So this is once again an area where your textbook will be an excellent resource, or just a general Google search to find other documentation will be really helpful. Now, certainly in our time together today, I'm going to show you some things with it, but there's no way we can cover everything there is to cover about this in our time together this semester, because there's lots of different alternative scenarios. A new program up here. Let me show you something that we have not talked about this semester that comes in handy in this scenario, and it is this button here at the top of our editing panel called Pattern. I don't know if any of you have used that before or even noticed that up there, but if I click on Pattern, notice I get this little dialog box that pops up that says, hey, I can basically, this is saying, hey, I can help you write some code. Would you like me to do that? And so notice, for example, I could click the radio button here, select star from SP Fly, and I could hit the check mark here, and it shows me, hey, here's all the different fields. And you could say, I want this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and I could say copy, and it goes back in, and it actually kind of helps me write some code here. So the idea behind this pattern button is it can, for a limited set of things, help you write code. Notice here, for example, message. You can give it the basic information, and it'll tell you about messages. If here's a write statement that gives you different patterns for what you want to write out. And basically it's going to give you some choices, you pick them, and it'll write the code for you. Well, for pattern, for calling a function is what we're talking about here. Let's go ahead and do that. But here's what I'm going to do actually first. Let's go ahead and write one line of code here. And what we're going to do is we're going to select, oops, don't have my caps lock key on, select star from SPFly into table, and I'm going to use dynamic creation here at data, and we'll just call this FLT table. Okay, so I'm ignoring our rule about select star for this particular example, because remember we said if you ever work with an entirety of a database table, this becomes a little bit easier. So now I'm going to want to display FLT table in this ALV grid. So how do I do that? Click on pattern, and I'm going to call a function. So I type in here the name of the function I want to call, which per our slides is reuse underscore ALV underscore list underscore display, and hit the check mark, and I get this, okay? Now, see this right here, and you notice most of this is commented out from line 11 through line, really through line 51. A lot of those lines are commented out. This is the different parameters that I could pass to this guy. So the nice thing about using this call function thing is it has outlined, hey, here's all the parameters, and then I can go in and uncomment the ones that I actually want to send as parameters and just leave the other ones all commented out. So this is the nice thing about using the pattern builder in this situation, assuming that you're going to use a set of these different parameters. So we said that there were two things that we had to set here. One of them is the T underscore out tab. Just to back up here, T underscore out tab is the name of the internal table that we're going to populate. So if we look through, now let me go and close this window. If we look through the parameters that I have been given here, and we've got to do some scrolling, you'll notice where it says tables, T underscore out tab, and that's not commented out. You know, that's our first sign that this is something that we have to pass to it. And so I'm just going to come over here, and the name of my internal table is FLT underscore table. Got to be careful not to put a period there, because this is a list of parameters, and so the period will go at the end here. Well, there's one other thing that I have to supply, and I don't know why in this particular display this is shown as well. Actually, let's just try this. Let's see what happens if we save this and then run this. Let's see what happens. We get this field catalog not found. Okay, so even though the pattern would suggest I only have to pass it one thing, we can see I actually do have to pass it a field catalog too. So we've got to specify that for this to be workable. So if I go back now, oh, and that was nice, it totally crashed my program. So yay for that. I don't remember if I saved it or not. Murphy's Law says that I did not. Oh, I did. Okay. Well, I might have. Let's see if my T underscore, yeah, my flight underscore table is there. So we had said that for the field catalog, it is I underscore structure name. So I just have to look through my list here, and sure enough, I see on line 18, I underscore structure underscore name. So I'm going to uncomment. Hope I got to switch to edit mode here. I'm going to uncomment. Let's try this again. Oh, I was clicking the wrong one. There we go. All right, so I'm going to uncomment that, and I pass it the name of the database table as a string. Okay, so do notice I put single quotes around that. Now you might also notice that this has turned red, which usually indicates an error, and in fact it indicates in this case an error, and it's one of those things that you have to be careful about. If we tried to run this now, we'd see that we couldn't because of this syntax error. Not only do I have to uncomment this line, this particular parameter is of type exporting. So I've got to come up here and uncomment line 11, which is the exporting option. So I have now supplied the only two required parameters I have to, which is the internal table and the field catalog that lists the names of the field. You can see there's all kinds of other things listed here, and if you want to know more about them, you can try going back into the function builder and looking at the documentation. But I'm just warning you right now, your best bet is probably going to be to Google, you know, ALV grid I underscore buffer underscore active, and find example code and other things that are more generically available online. Because there are, for whatever reason, no examples of code in the function builder. So you see a very, very terse textual display and not much else. But you will find all kinds of resources out there on all of these different features. So here's what I get. This is my internal table. You can see, obviously, a lot less lines of code that I had to write here. We could create something like this if we were so inclined, but certainly it's nice not to have to output the headers and line everything up in the fashion that we have. So this is a basic reuse ALV, and this particular one is the list display. You'll notice that we have gotten some things for free, which is all of these buttons here at the top that do allow the user now to control things like the sort order. And they can click on this and they can say, you know, I want to sort by, well, let's see, let's sort by departure city. So they can come over here and say, I want to sort by departure city, by airline. So now they do this, and you see the sort order changed here. So we pick up this set of controls here by using this particular method of outputting things to the screen. So this is the ALV, or the reuse ALV list display. And the code that we wrote is pretty much what you see here, although what I have done here is I've not used the pattern builder and I've just typed out the entire code. So if you don't want to use the pattern builder, you don't have to, but what we have observed here is there are two parameters you have to pass. You have to pass it a structure name and you have to pass it an internal table. Questions about this?
Can you use drill down with this?
You can, but it gets a lot more complicated because what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to write a function that you pass to the ALV grid for it to use to control the drill down. So it is not in any way trivial, but you absolutely can do it. So I mentioned, let's go back to the slides here. I mentioned that there were two things here. There is this ALV list display and there's the ALV grid display. So let's look at if we wanted to do the same thing here, but with the grid display. So just in your brain, remember what this guy looks like here. And let's go back and let's wipe out all of this code to start over again. By the way, you'll notice it gave us on line 49 through 51 the if sy-subrc not equal to 0 for error handling, because it knows that we're going to have probably a database query here and things like that. So that's part of the pattern builder template as well. So this time I'm going to go up here and I'm going to use the pattern, and this time we're going to call function reuse underscore ALV underscore grid underscore display, which is, these are kind of brother or sister functions. So they in some ways behave similarly, but there are some kind of interesting differences here. So you'll notice we have the same basic list here of parameters. And so if I go down here and I find I underscore structure name, and sometimes the hardest part of this is finding those because for whatever reason these aren't like alphabetized or anything like that. So I always spend a little more time, it seems like, scrolling through looking for it. But here's my I underscore structure name. I'll uncomment that. And remember, this is where I put in the name of my database table, since I'm using a database table as the basis of this. Get rid of the keyword, or get rid of the comment around exporting. And then I have to give it the internal table, which is T underscore out tab. Remember, the big thing here that you have to keep straight is you give it the name of the field catalog with quotes around it, but you give it the name of the table without quotes around it. So you just have to make sure you're adhering to that. And just to show you an example of this, and I have no idea why we have this for the grid output, but not for the list output. You'll notice we have here as one of the parameters I underscore grid underscore title. And so I could put a title on this called my flights, and we'll just see what that does here. That's an example of another optional parameter that we'll set here just for the sake of our example. So let me save this, and when we run this, this is what we get, okay? So very similar to what we saw a few moments ago, but you can see visually it is distinct. You can see the little flights in the upper left-hand corner that I put there, the same set of controls along the top that the user could use to change the order of this table. The user actually would have the ability here to inhibit the display of certain fields if they were so inclined, and they have a lot of things there regarding sending the data to Excel. Some of the things that we use, you might recall an ERP sim, where we were exporting data. We get that for free as part of this structure. So this is the reuse ALV grid display as opposed to the list display. And you can tell based on what we see back here that clearly there are a lot more options we could specify here in terms of the actual layout itself, in terms of filtering the data. You can actually make some of these where the data cells are editable. So if the user wanted to, they could actually pop up there and change some things. If you think about some of what we did when you played ERP Sim, in particular the transaction where you set advertising, where you were given a grid and you typed numbers in, that was an ALV grid. But it was an editable ALV grid that had a save button and could be used as a way of getting input from the user. But that gets into a lot of code that you have to write to support that we just won't go into at this point in our discussion. So here we have the ALV grid display, and notice pretty much the same interface here. You're setting I underscore structure underscore name, and you are giving it the internal table. Don't forget, we got this for free with the pattern builder, the period that shows up at the very end, because really everything from the line call function until this period is just one statement. And you notice that this looks a lot like the syntax of calling a method in a object-oriented ABAP program. We do see a parameter that we don't see with methods, which is the tables, which is simply used to denote a table that's being passed to a method, or excuse me, to a function. But other than that, this should look really, really similar to what we have done in the context of methods. Any questions about this so far? All right, well, so I gave you the easy scenario first. The harder scenario is, suppose we're not doing a select star, and therefore we only want to use some of the fields in the table. For example, if we go back here and let me just kind of make note of this. In this output, and by the way, you'll notice it's not actually listing the name of the fields at the top. It's actually gone into the ABAP dictionary and pulled the field description and used that as the column header, which is really, really nice. That's clearly what we would want to see happen there. And so it is using the entire table. Now, I'll say this. It's using the entire table, but what's not up there? Yeah, the MANDT, the mandate field for the client number, automatically gets inhibited, and we just don't have to worry about it. So this, it is a select star, but it's a select star that doesn't actually show the client number field, okay? Well, what if we only wanted to pass to this some of the fields? So for example, if I look at SP fly and I say, okay, I'm just going to pick one of these out, or a few of these out. I want the carrier ID, I want the city from, and the city to. You know, you guys have messed with this table in quite a few programs to this point. So we know that I could come here and say select CARRID, city from, city to. Okay? And syntactically, I'm pretty good here. But what happens now in my code, because my flight table is only going to have 3 fields in it, but this I underscore structure name is suggesting that the field, that the table matches the definition of the database table. And we will in fact see that this is what we get, okay? And it's because, if you notice my specific error message here, San Francisco cannot be interpreted as a number. Basically, it thinks the table is of one format and contains one thing, and clearly it doesn't. So we're seeing a data mismatching and type mismatching here. Ultimately, the specific error message you see will be different from time to time, but the problem is universal. This won't work. We have to fix this. So anytime you are only going to be passing a subset of a database table, or you have an internal table that has nothing to do with the database, it's something that you have built yourself, you are going to have to create your own field table. Now, if you are going to create your own field table, here's how you do it. If not using all the fields from the dictionary structure, number one, you don't set I underscore structure name. The only time you set I underscore structure name is when you are reusing the exact structure of something in the dictionary. So if you're not doing that, you don't set I underscore structure name. Instead, you're going to set a parameter called IT underscore field cat. But before you do that, you're going to have to build the field catalog. Okay? So what we're going to see is we're going to have to manually create an internal table in a specified format to be the field catalog, and then set the name of that internal table for IT field cat. So once again, it's not complicated, but it is going to involve us writing a few lines of code here. The first is the data type of your field catalog has to be SLIS underscore T underscore field cat underscore ALV. This is a great example of, this is not hard, but if you go and look in the function browser and try to find a reference to that data type, good luck. I mean, the documentation literally says things like, you have to pass it a field catalog, and it's great. Okay, but what's the format of the field catalog? Well, it's a field catalog. Just pass it a field catalog, like you're supposed to psychically know that. So the documentation here is really, really poor, which is why I say your textbook does a good job with this, or certainly Google can be your friend. So what we're going to do is we have data field cat, which is a field cat. The type here, that's actually an internal table. Okay, so SLIS underscore T, I'm pretty sure that T stands for table, okay? So that line of code is going to give us an internal table. We need a work area. And just for clarity here, I'm calling my work area a cat line, okay? Which sounds kind of fun, but that stands for, line in the field catalog. So data cat line, like line of field cat. So really, your code could probably look exactly like this. I mean, you could just reproduce those exact 2 lines anytime you need to use this technique. Now we have to build the catalog. Well, here's what you need. Cat line dash, you have a field called col underscore pause for column position. And this is just the column number, with the first column being labeled 1, second column being number 2, and so on. So if you have 20 different columns, you're going to have cat line dash col underscore pause 1 through 20. Okay? And for that, the field name in my example is, you just specify as a string the name of that field. Now, this is the name of the field in the internal table. So, for example, that might be carid or conid or whatever the name of the field is. That's not what's going to be displayed. That is what the technical name of the field is. And then the third one here is actually the name of the table. So we have to specify that, what internal table I'm using as the source of this. So cat line tab name is the internal table that this field catalog relates to. And then lastly, cat line dash cell text underscore M is the label you want displayed. So if you think about it, what we have just done is we have built up a work area that has 4 fields in it. The first one is the column position number, which we set to 1. The second one, the field name, which let's just say, for example, here, we set to conid. Okay. The third one, the internal table name, might be my flights, just for the sake of example. And then the fourth one is what I want the text here to be, which let's just say this is connection ID. So we have built up a work area, we've built up a structure, and the only thing we have left to do now is we append that to our field catalog. So append cat line to field cat. And I have now taken care of my first column of output. So the reason why I say this can get kind of tedious is if you have 8 columns, you're going to have to go through this. But if you think about it, the nice thing is when you go to create the next one, so the very next line of code here would very likely be cat line dash call pause, and we would set that to 2. Okay, we're reusing the same work area. So if you think about it, we would have to change this guy. We would have to change the database field name, but I don't have to change the internal table name because that's going to be the same. So I'm actually going to have, 3 more things I'm going to have to set, and then I append. And then another 3 things I set, and then I append. So this could be a lot of lines of code, but it's just pretty mechanical here for us to actually do this. So let's do this. So I'm going to go back to my program here. And it looks like the last time we ran it, I must have crashed it when I showed that we couldn't do it the way we wanted to here. So let me give you an example of this one. So go into edit mode here, and what I'm actually going to do is I will use spfly, but I'm going to, just to be consistent with what I put in your lecture notes, we're just going to keep this real simple. We're just going to do city from and city to. So we're going to do 2 columns of output here just so we don't have to do a huge amount of typing here. And so after that, I'm going to do data field cat type slis underscore t underscore field cat underscore ALV. That's exactly from our last slide. Data cat line, like line of field cat. Okay, and then cat line dash call underscore pause, call underscore pause equals 1, cat line dash field name, and the name of my first field, this should match up with what we see on line 8. This is going to be city from. Got to put a period at the end of that. Cat line dash tab name equals, and the name of my internal table we see on line 8 as well is FLT underscore table, and then cat line dash cell text underscore M equals, and I want this to display city from. as the header at the top. And so now I append cat line to field cat. So that was column 1. So now the nice thing is I can just come here and I can do copy and I can do paste and I can say column position 2 is going to be city 2. It's still flight table. I could actually just get rid of this line if I wanted to, or I could leave it. It doesn't really matter. Should be consistent with my casing. And this would be city 2. And I follow up by appending it to the field cat. Okay? So now we said that my function call is going to change a little bit here. I don't use iStructure name anymore. So I'm just going to come over here and comment that out. I could delete the reference to SPFly. I just won't in this example. And instead I look for the one here called IT field cat. So I'm going to uncomment IT field cat and I'm going to pass it the name of my field cat, not in quotes. And the name of my field cat is field cat. So FIELDCAT. So now instead of matching up with the dictionary structure exactly, it's going to use my field catalog as the column headers and the description. And in fact, that's what we see here. You know, there's my city from and city to header, and everything is exactly as we would specify. I only did 2 columns for the sake of saving us time, but clearly if we had 10 or more columns here, it would just be more lines of code in building up the field catalog. But notice once again, I still get those lines there at the top, even though this is something that we built more manually. The user still can go back here now and change the sort order and do other things like that clearly they could not do with our list-based output based on the right statement. In your textbook, there is a chapter devoted to ALV grids, and it's more formally here they call it ALV reports, and so chapter 14 is based on that. And in fact, page number 643, whoops, not 43, but 643. In your textbook gives you some examples, and it shows you, for example, what we did here, which is building up the field catalog. For some reason, your textbook, after every line, clears the work area before it builds the next line. I think that's kind of overkill. But other than that, you'll see this matches up with what we did. In other sections of this chapter, they do discuss some of the parameters that we have not discussed, but for the most part, you'll see that this parallels what we have talked about. And then it goes on here. Notice, though, it shows some additional things being set. The layout, they're just specifying other parameters that you see specified here that you could play around with if you were so inclined. Layout zebra is something that you can change here that gives you like the striped lines and other things like that. So there's just all kinds of different options here that your book is going to walk through in its examples. And there's our sample code, and that is in your lecture slides. Pretty much this is the code that we just wrote together, although I did not use the pattern builder, so we don't see all the commented out lines here. Any questions about this? Yes, ma'am.
So tables are the only variables that don't get the quotes in it?
You got it. Other questions? All right, so that's the end of what we will talk about in terms of ALV grids. So remember I told you we had 2 topics left. That is one of the 2 topics that we had left. So I think what we will do, well, let me ask you guys, we'll put this to a vote. Everybody gets to vote. Here are the 2 options. Option 1, we stop today and we start talking about subroutines when we get together a week from Tuesday. Or option 2, we start talking about subroutines today. Okay? So how many of you want to hold off on talking about subroutines until next time we get together? 1, 2, hold them up so I can count. You can only vote once. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, this is going to be close. How many of you want to talk about subroutines now? Okay, I think that it was close, but the Electoral College definitely carried it here. And so we'll just go ahead and we're wrapping up about 20 minutes early today. I have not yet put this out in D2L, but what I will do later today, look in D2L for an optional homework assignment, which will give you, I'm going to go back in, I'm going to look for 2 programs that we've written already this semester, and I may go all the way back to near the beginning of the semester. So you should have your homework submission. If nothing else, you can download it from D2L, so you should have that code. And all I'm going to ask you to do is change your program so that it outputs by an ALV grid. And you'll turn that in, and that will be worth extra credit, okay? So I wanted to give you some time to practice with ALV grid, but I also wanted to give you an extra credit opportunity. Let me mention one more general announcement. We're getting close to the end of the semester, so do keep in mind if there's any work that you want to turn in for points that you have not yet turned in, the deadline for that is the Friday of the last week of classes, okay? So the last week of classes, you can turn things in up until 11:59 p.m. on that Friday, but I won't take work on what would be exam week, okay? So we have, I guess that means about 2 weeks left for you to turn in anything that you are missing to this point, 2 weeks and a day to be precise. Okay, so we will call our time today to a close. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and I'll look forward to seeing you when we get together in a week and a half.